of Philadelphia. That website is historyofvaccines.org. Thank you so much, sir, for being with us today.
You're welcome.
We'll head now to the floor of the House of Representatives, where they're getting underway with morning business.
The Speaker's Rooms, Washington, D.C., November 3rd, 2011. I hereby appoint the Honorable Michael G. Fitzpatrick to act as Speaker pro tempore on this day. Signed, John A. Boehner, Speaker of the House of Representatives.
Pursuant to the order of the House of January 5, 2011, the Chair will now recognize members from lists submitted by the majority and minority leaders for morning hour debate. The Chair will alternate recognition between the parties, with each party limited to 1 hour, and each member other than the majority and minority leaders and the minority whip limited to 5 minutes each, but in no event shall debate continue beyond 11:50 this morning. The Chair recognizes the gentleman from Texas, Mr. Poe, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. As we approach Veterans Day, the day we honor those who served and came back home. And I want to talk about a very special veteran. Frank Buckles, when he was 16 years of age, some say 15, during the beginning of the Great World War I, wanted to join and go overseas. Remember, they sang that song, those doughboys, when they went overseas. George Cohan's song, Over There. And they wouldn't come back till it was over there. The war started. He tried to join the Marines. They wouldn't take him because he was not 18. He tried different recruiters. He finally found an Army recruiter. He says he just told the recruiter, a whopper, that he was 21. The recruiter took him, swore him in, and the fastest way he could get to Europe and get into action was to drive an ambulance. This is a photograph of Frank Buckles, Jr. when he served in the Great World War I. After that war was over with, he came back home, although 116,000 Americans did not come back home. 4 million of them served in World War I. Frank Buckles joined the Merchant Marines. He was in the Philippines when World War II started, and he was captured by the Japanese and held in a prisoner of war camp for 3.5 years. He was rescued, came back home to America, went to his farm in West Virginia, and he worked on the farm until he was 109 years old. Frank Buckles died this year at the age of 110. He was the last surviving doughboy from America that served in the Great World War I. This is a photograph taken shortly before his death this year. Frank Buckles, the lone survivor of World War I, a veteran of that great war, came back home, and his wish before he died, Mr. Speaker, was that we would have a permanent memorial for all that served in World War I on the Mall. You see, we have a memorial for Vietnam veterans. We have a memorial for the Korean veterans, the World War II veterans. There is a small memorial for the D.C. troops that served in World War I, but there's no memorial on the Mall for all of the doughboys like Frank Buckles that served, and they're all gone, Mr. Speaker. And it's our job, it's important for us to have that memorial for them, to allow it to be constructed. There is one memorial in Kansas City for the World War I doughboys, but we need one here also on the Mall. And it's important that we honor these great Americans, because they are the veterans that we honor, that we appreciate, and that we should not forget, although all of them, including the lone survivor, Frank Buckles, Jr., has died. So I hope this House would join me and Emanuel Cleaver from Missouri in passing legislation to authorize this memorial for those World War I doughboys. Veterans Day is approaching. We are approaching the 100th anniversary of the Great World War I. We should remember them, and we can do this by erecting and allowing a memorial to be constructed on the Mall. The veterans are the greatest that we have. We should remember every one of them, those that served and came home, and those that served, did not come home, and those that are serving and representing us today. And that's just the way it is. I yield back.
Chair recognizes the gentleman from Oregon, Mr. Blumenauer, for 5 minutes.
There's a drama being played out in the divorce and bankruptcy court with the McCourt family and the Los Angeles Dodgers. It's another chapter in the sad war against fans by people who make these multi-billion-dollar enterprise possible. The fans, the very people who make these multi-billion-dollar enterprises possible in the first place. It's an all too familiar refrain. No city is the threat of bankruptcy or being held hostage by an owner threatening to move if their demands are not met. No one, except the fans of the team that is arguably the most successful franchise in professional sports, the current Super Bowl champions and currently undefeated and maybe the strongest team in the NFL this year, the Green Bay Packers. Packer fans will tell you they're unique. Little Green Bay, Wisconsin, with only 104,000 people, a metropolitan area of less than 1/3 the smallest media market in the United States, but arguably the most successful franchise. Green Bay is special perhaps for another reason. It's the only franchise in all of Major League Sports that doesn't have to worry about some billionaire egomaniac running the franchise into the ground or being tired of it and selling it off to another city, or just the community being held hostage by obscene demands for even more revenue, more sacrifice from fans in the community. You know, that's been the fate. One city a year since 1950 has had a franchise change, and others have been had the screws put to them. But in Green Bay, it is owned by 112,158 shareholders. Each shareholder is given voting rights in the franchise, and no shareholder can hold a controlling stake in the company. The Packers can raise funds for team expenses through prudent decision-making by the board of directors and by offering public shares. Well, Mr. Speaker, there's something to be said for the approach of the long-term success of the Green Bay Packers. But, you know, sadly, the billionaires who run the NFL and other professional sports franchises have decided otherwise. All major leagues, formally or informally, prohibit public ownership. The NFL formally outlawed public ownership in 1961, the same year it instituted a radical revenue-sharing policy, but grandfathered in Green Bay. Major League Baseball outlawed public ownership through an informal resolution passed in the mid-1980s when Joan Kroc sought to donate her baseball team, the Padres, to San Diego. Well, I think the sad record is that the billionaires are not always so brilliant, but they are long on money, political influence, and ego, and they know a sweet deal when they've got it. The franchises to this point have been a ticket to even greater wealth, in part because these franchises are part of a cartel that would be illegal in most other industries. Guaranteed massive profits, they're the only show in town. They often can pick up and move, and of course witness some of these egregious stadium deals. I was just in Cincinnati earlier this week, and people there, whether they're conservative, liberal, Democrats, or Republicans, are still holding their heads about being saddled with an egregious contract for a recent new stadium that put all the revenue upside in the pockets of the owners. George Steinbrenner recently passed away. He was a wealthy man to begin with family business, but he became a billionaire based on his Yankee empire and his ability to further enrich himself as a result, in part, of a construction of a brand new Yankee stadium that not only cost an astronomical sum for the taxpayers of New York, but further inflated the value of his ownership of the Yankees. There have been critical appraisals that have suggested that it would have been cheaper for New York to simply buy the New York Yankees outright for the value of the team than submit to the outrageous demands from Steinbrenner to keep them there. Well, the gravy train is fueled by another source of revenue. It not only having communities and fans over a barrel, but they have an antitrust exemption that enables them to negotiate lucrative television contracts worth billions of dollars. For instance, the current NFL contract worth $3 billion a year to go with the $6 billion that has been pried out of locals for stadium deals and parking. Mr. Speaker, I strongly urge my colleagues to look at legislation Congresswoman Han and I will be introducing today, Give Fans a Chance. It's time to do that, to broaden the ownership options, allow democracy and the free enterprise system to work.
Expired. The chair recognizes the gentleman from Illinois, Mr. Dole, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, the American taxpayer is facing a struggling economy, skyrocketing debt, and political partisanship here in Washington. While every American family must balance the budget, the federal government does not have to do the same. Additionally, publicly traded companies are required to provide financial statements for their shareholders, whereas the government is not held accountable to the American taxpayer. That is why Representative Mike Quigley and I are introducing bipartisan legislation that would require the federal government prepare and publish online periodic financial statements that are independently audited and that are accurately reflect the government's true financial condition. In the short time that I've been in Congress, I've focused my efforts on creating an environment that fosters job creation and gets our economy back on track. Part of that effort involves America's fiscal house getting in order, and that is why I have worked to curb out-of-control government spending. Moving forward, I believe that we must also reform the way our federal accounting methods are conducted to make the budget process more transparent and accessible to every American, so that they, as taxpayers, can truly know how their money is being spent and what our government's true liabilities are. That is why I am introducing the bipartisan Truth in Government Accounting Act, H.R. 3332. To protect private sector shareholders, the federal government requires each publicly traded company to file periodic GAAP financial statements that are independently audited and that are accurately reflect the company's true financial condition. By contrast, the federal government's own accounting practices substantially conceal and confuse the federal government's true financial condition, especially with respect to long-term unfunded liabilities and year-over-year spending. To protect taxpayers as much as the private sector shareholders, the federal government should similarly require each federal agency to file periodic GAAP financial statements that are independently audited and that accurately reflect the agency's true financial condition. The Truth in Government Accounting Act would require the federal government to do so, to make the resulting federal government financial statements easily available online, and to require zero baseline budgeting. This bill will require all federal agencies to provide 3 quarterly and 1 annual consolidated financial statement, just as the private sector must do, using the fair value accrual accounting method on all their assets and liabilities, including unfunded entitlement liabilities. These statements will be audited by a single entity, the Government Accountability Office, an independent, nonpartisan agency that reports to the Congress. These audited statements will put online in terms of a searchable website for all Americans to use and to see easily. As incredible as it may seem, there is not a simple way for the American public to easily view our national budget with all of its liabilities, current and long-term. What exists now is a system where information is scattered between federal agency and government office websites. Our bill creates a simple and accessible website that can be a one-stop shop for all information related to our federal budget based off of websites that we know currently exist, like recovery.gov. Americans deserve a transparent way to see where their tax dollars go and what they are on the hook for in the future. The bill will require the Congressional Budget Office to use current year spending as a baseline for estimating future mandatory and discretionary changes, to determine whether the future legislation would increase or decrease federal spending. It will be measured against current year spending and not against previously anticipated and hypothetical future year spending. The American people deserve an open and transparent budgeting process, and the Truth in Government Accounting Act provides just that. By requiring agencies to provide quarterly financial statements, auditing those financial statements, and putting that information on a comprehensive website, as well as implementing the zero-based budgeting, we will greatly improve our federal budget practice and enhance the public's ability to know how their tax dollars are being spent. We expect and demand that companies conduct their business in a transparent manner. We should expect and demand no less of our federal government. I want to urge my colleagues to co-sponsor this legislation. The American taxpayers deserve true accounting of how their money is being spent. With that, I yield back.
Chair recognizes the gentleman from Illinois, Mr. Gutierrez, for 5 minutes.
Mr. Speaker, I've come to the floor on several occasions this year to denounce the abuses of the current government in Puerto Rico and discuss where the government has taken actions to suppress dissent and conduct business in secret, cutting the people out of the process of governance. I've discussed the current regime push for a dangerous, environmentally risky 92-mile natural gas pipeline known locally as the Gasoducto, the violations of civil rights and human rights of workers who protested the firing up to 30,000 government employees, closing the legislature to the press and the public and conducting their business in secret, the violent treatment of students who opposed a steep fee increase, whose protest was broken up with billy clubs and pepper spray, the civil rights abuses revealed in the devastating report by our own U.S. Department of Justice about the systematic abuses by the Puerto Rican Police Department, the attempt to destroy the Puerto Rican Bar Association, one of the most important independent organizations of civil society. And the reaction in official Puerto Rico to my denunciations here in the House is telling as well. The legislature in Puerto Rico, both houses controlled by the ruling party, approved a joint resolution condemning me, not condemning the abusive tactics and oppressive practices I denounced, and that the Department of Justice confirmed exists, but condemning me for telling you about them. Now the effort in Puerto Rico to silence any and all opposition has reached a new low. Incredible as it may sound, according to press reports published in Puerto Rico, the Vatican sent an official to conduct an investigation on allegations of political involvement by the Archbishop of San Juan, conducted in secrecy until the press got wind of it this week. While no names have surfaced of who filed an accusation against the Archbishop or who was in contact with the Vatican, it is telling that the elite of the ruling party has been quick to saturate the airwaves and pages of local newspapers with loud public accusations against the Archbishop. Attacking the Archbishop is nothing new for the ruling party in Puerto Rico. They've done it many times in the past. I'm a strong supporter of the democratic principle of separation of church and state. But as someone who has spent my life working to defend the rights of workers, minorities, working-class people, and immigrants, I have often been joined by people of faith, and particularly leaders of the Catholic Church. Just as here on the mainland, in Puerto Rico there is a broad religious leadership that is joined with the people as they strive to achieve a greater degree of social justice. Among those people is the Archbishop Roberto González Nieves of San Juan. Archbishop González Nieves has courageously stepped forward on very important issues in Puerto Rico, such as the struggle to achieve peace on the island of Vieques, the need to protect civil rights and free speech, the freedom of political prisoners, and the just treatment of the poor. But the one issue that has inflamed the passions of the ruling party against the Archbishop has been his clear and firm stance on the need to affirm Puerto Rican identity and the existence of a Puerto Rican nation. He has expressed a bold and comprehensive opinion in reference to Puerto Rican nationhood that, quote, is, motherland, nation, and identity are indivisible gifts of God's love. He's had the temerity to incorporate the Puerto Rican flag into the Catholic Church, a Puerto Rican church. Mr. Speaker, this is just another instance where the regime, through any means necessary, seeks to silence all voices of opposition and undermine all independent institutions on the island. whether they initiated the effort to silence the Archbishop or whether they're just cheering it loudly from the sidelines. The current regime in Puerto Rico is repeating its pattern of driving all opposing forces into the wilderness. Mr. Speaker, I am one voice, and I suspect that the Archbishop González Nieves is another, that cannot be silenced or driven into the wilderness. I will be going to Puerto Rico this Friday night and trekking to the mountains of Adjuntas to meet with the good people of Casa Pueblo this Sunday, where we will discuss the next steps of the people's opposition to the Gasoducto gas pipeline project. Interestingly, the Archbishop also expressed serious concern about the Gasoducto and in June participated in a meeting with leaders of the community discussing possible actions they could take in case construction of the pipeline actually begins. I am sure that the regime's attempts in Puerto Rico to suppress the will of the people and impose upon them politically driven policies such as the Gasoducto or get the institution of civil society shut up will not be happy to hear what I have to say next week when I arrive on the island.
Chair recognizes the gentleman from Illinois, Mr. Shimkus, for 5 minutes. Without objection.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Canadian oil sands transported via pipelines play a major role in supplying the energy needs of southern Illinois. 2 weeks ago, I visited the oil sands in Alberta, Canada, and here's exactly what we saw. On Monday of this week, I visited 3 facilities also. But before I talk about those 3 facilities, Daniel Yergin yesterday in the Washington Post said this about the oil sands of Canada. Oil sands production in Canada today is 1.5 million barrels per day, more oil than Libya exported before the Civil War. Canadian oil sands output could double to 3 million barrels per day by the beginning of the next decade. This increase, along with this other oil output, would make Canada a larger oil producer than Iran, becoming the world's 5th largest behind Russia, Saudi Arabia, the United States, and China. On Monday of this week, I visited 3 facilities in southern Illinois that utilize Canadian oil sands: Robinson Refinery, the Patoka Tank Farm, and the Wood River Refinery. Pipelines play a vital role in providing the energy needs for our daily lives. There are over 2.5 million miles of pipelines in this country. 175,000 miles on onshore and offshore hazardous liquid pipelines, mostly oil, 321,000 miles on onshore, offshore gas transmission and gathering lines, and 2,066,000 miles of natural gas distribution mains and service pipeline. Keystone XL would stretch about 1,700 miles. Again, going back to Yergin's article, he says, though large, he's referring to the Keystone XL pipeline, though large, it would increase the length of the pipeline network in the United States by just 1%. Due to the high volumes of various liquids and gases that must be transported, pipelines are the feasible mode of transportation. Imagine trying to transport this gas, crude oil, on rail, on trucks, in our major waterways. In fact, just today there was a supertanker that was just hijacked by pirates on the high seas. That's the challenge of moving crude oil other than the pipeline system. We continue to import oil from countries that are not our closest friends. Further blocking of this pipeline development will only increase foreign oil imports from far away off places that are not our neighbor. This pipeline application is a jobs plan. 5 major labor unions have endorsed this project, and there would be 20,000 construction jobs. As refineries expand, there's an estimated 100,000 new jobs as a whole. This Keystone XL pipeline is supported by the AFL-CIO and several other organized labor groups. In fact, they have started to run ads today in support of the pipeline and encouraging the Obama administration to approve it. Canadian oil sands are already creating jobs in my district in southern Illinois. Caterpillar, which my friend Joe Wilson is going to talk about too, you'll see a larger smock than this. This is one of their major pickup trucks, lightly said. It's about 4 stories tall. The major place that this goes to is the oil sands in Canada. The tires themselves are 2 stories tall. The Caterpillar 797 is the largest truck they make, is partially assembled in Decatur, Illinois. The truck is so large, final assembly must be done at the delivery site. The largest concentration of these Caterpillar trucks are in Alberta, Canada. These are manufactured in the good old USA. These are great Midwestern manufacturing jobs that are directly tied to the oil sands development. At my last stop on Monday to the ConocoPhillips refinery, I just posed this basic question to the reporters who attended the press conference. Would you rather have the oil being refined in Wood River, Illinois, come from Venezuela, Saudi Arabia, the Middle East, or Africa, or would you have that oil rather come from Canada? I think the answer is simple. So this administration must approve the Keystone XL pipeline, and I yield back the balance of my time.
Chair recognizes the gentlewoman from California, Ms. Lee, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise again today, as I've been doing every week, to sound the alarm on the crisis of poverty in America. 12 members of Congress are or will be participating in the Food Stamp Challenge, which is a nationwide effort to bring attention to the needs of the 45 million Americans who are receiving food benefits under the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program, or food stamps. For 1 week, we lived on the food budget of the average food stamp recipient, or $31.50 a week, $4.50 a day, which means I spent on average $1.50 a meal. This is for 1 week. Let me thank Congresswoman Debbie Wasserman Schultz, Tim Ryan, Joe Courtney, Jan Schakowsky, Donna Christensen, Alcee Hastings, Keith Ellison, Jim Moran, Jackie Spear, Ted Deutsch, Marcia Fudge, and Eleanor Holmes Norton for their participation and their commitment to drawing attention to the struggle of millions of hardworking families to put food on the table during very difficult economic times. We face limited food choices, lacked access to fresh and healthy foods, and were repeatedly exposed to unhealthy and inadequate food choices that promote poor health and obesity and hypertension. But of course, our week will end. I hope that every member of Congress will stop for at least a moment and consider the millions of American families who will face these challenges each and every day until they can find a good job with a real living wage. Now, I'm a former food stamp recipient, and let me tell you that I was deeply thankful for my fellow Americans who were there for me and my children during a difficult time in our lives. The benefits that were extended to us were a critical help and provided a vital bridge over troubled waters when we needed them the most. But we didn't want to stay on food stamps forever, and we got off as soon as we could. Let me also say that now is not the time to gut these critical human needs programs. We are facing record poverty levels and unacceptably high unemployment rates, and it is simply unconscionable to attempt to balance the budgets on the back of the most vulnerable and the neediest Americans. We must create what is being called a circle of protection around these core programs that keep American families from suffering the worst impacts of living in poverty. But we must do more than just minimize the cuts to programs. We must make bold, targeted investments that will lift those families up and off of food stamps. We must improve and extend programs that create jobs and provide ladders of opportunity for all. We must commit ourselves to removing barriers, and there are many, to opportunity like poverty and hunger, so that we can reignite the American dream. Mr. Speaker, on January in 2008, the House unanimously passed a resolution that I authored, which committed Congress to the goal of cutting poverty in America in half in a decade. Now it's time to put that commitment to the test. An estimated 46 million Americans were living in poverty in 2010, and according to the latest census figure, the official poverty rate in 2010 now is 15.1%. It's simply unconscionable that the richest and most powerful nation in the world can allow so many of their fellow Americans to fall to the wayside and be left with little hope and few opportunities to reach their American dream. It's clear that our policies and programs addressing poverty have not kept pace with the growing needs of millions of Americans. It's time we make the commitment to confront poverty head-on create pathways out of poverty, and provide opportunities for all. I've introduced H.R. 3300, the half in 10 of 2011. This bill would establish a federal interagency working group on reducing poverty. The working group will be tasked with developing and implementing a national plan to reduce poverty in half in 10 years. We really should be talking about eliminating poverty. They would also work to eliminate child poverty, extreme poverty, and finally put an end to the historic and ongoing disparity in poverty rates in communities of color. It's simply unacceptable that communities of color continue to face disturbingly high rates of poverty, with 27.4% African Americans, 26.5% of Hispanics living in poverty when compared to their white counterparts who have a poverty rate of just under 10%. It's time to work together to dramatically improve access to opportunity for low-income Americans so that they can climb up the economic ladder and reignite the fire of the American dream. We must put partisanship aside to preserve and extend the vital human needs programs that protect our most vulnerable communities. We cannot and we must not seek to balance the budget on the backs of the American's poor, her children, and an entire generation of young people who are really now taking to the streets to protest the fact that they are afraid that theirs will be the first generation in American history to be less well off than the one before.
Chair recognizes the gentleman from South Carolina, Mr. Wilson, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. 2 weeks ago, I traveled to Fort McMurray in the province of Alberta in Canada with Subcommittee Chairman John Shimkus of Illinois and Congressman Bob Latta of Ohio of the Energy and Commerce Committee. We were accompanied by the Honorable Cal Dallas, the Minister of Intergovernmental, International, and Aboriginal Relations for Alberta. We were welcomed to Edmonton by the Honorable Alison Redmond, the newly inaugurated Premier of Alberta. The purpose of this visit was to see firsthand the development of Canadian oil sands and to fully understand the positive impact this exploration has for the American people. We were briefed on the Keystone Pipeline and how this project creates jobs. We saw the environmental stewardship, where development is subject to the environmental standards that are among the most stringent in the world. The government of Alberta requires that companies remediate and reclaim 100% of the land after the oil has been extracted. This project will connect a growing supply of Canadian oil with the largest refining markets in the United States and will significantly reduce America's reliance on oil from overseas as new jobs are created in Canada and America. As the oil sands production grows in the next 4 years, the industry is expected to generate 340,000 new jobs. This is in addition to the 110,000 jobs currently provided. There are more than 900 American businesses that supply goods and services for Canadian oil sands development. In my home state of South Carolina, oil sands development will add up to $128 million per year to the state's economy. It will support nearly 2,000 jobs per year. Companies in South Carolina supply equipment, parts, and services used in the oil sands projects and pipelines. In this picture, we're standing in front of a 12-foot high tire made by Michelin in Lexington County, South Carolina. Each tire is valued at $60,000. The Michelin plants in Lexington currently employ over 500 people in the earth mover division. The tire manufacturer also has facilities in the upcountry of our state with their North American headquarters in Greenville. There are also over 100 large mine haul trucks operating in the oil sands powered by MTU engines. The engines are produced in Aiken County, South Carolina. By next year, the plant in Graniteville will be producing MTU's largest engine for the haul truck market. When MTU announced that Aiken County was to be its home for its new manufacturing facility last year, the company pledged to invest $45 million and create 250 new jobs over 4 years. However, last month, the plant officials said MTU is already employing 250 people and will achieve its investment goal by the end of this year. It's very simple. If Canadian families do well, American families do well. For every dollar the U.S. spends on imports from Canada, 90 cents is returned to the American economy, paying for equipment and services. Developing the oil sands is clearly more jobs for Canada and more jobs for America. We all know our country needs to be less dependent on oil from overseas. Canada's oil sands are clearly mutually beneficial to Canada and America and the security of North America. Very significantly, Canada's enormous deposits of 175.2 billion barrels of proven reserves of oil places it third in the world. 170 billion of these barrels are in the oil sands, and these deposits place Canada as one of the central sources of production growth in the coming decades. It represents about 60% of the world's accessible oil right here in our neighborhood. I am grateful that Canada is our largest trading partner and the largest supplier of oil to America. Canada contributes 22% of the total oil imports for America's daily use of 19.1 million barrels. Congress has indicated its support for oil sands. In July, we passed the North American-Made Energy Security Act. This bill urges the President to approve the pipeline. I appreciate jobs for Alberta, which produces jobs for America. I yield the balance of my time.
Chair recognizes the gentleman from North Carolina, Mr. Butterfield, for 5 minutes.
Let me thank you, Mr. Speaker, for yielding time to me this morning, and thank my colleagues for their attention. Before I start, Mr. Speaker, let me just take a moment to comment about one of the previous speakers this morning, my dear friend Congresswoman Barbara Lee from the state of California. Congresswoman Lee has been an advocate for low-income families for as long as I can remember, and especially since I first came to Congress some 7.5 years ago. She has been tenacious on this issue, and I just want to publicly thank her for her advocacy. I represent a low-income, low-wealth district in eastern North Carolina. My district is the 4th poorest district in the nation, and so I understand full well the challenges that she has confronted, and thank her so very much. But, Mr. Speaker, I've come to the floor this morning to talk about voter suppression. Yes, voter suppression across the country. Republicans are tightening the restrictions on who can vote and how Americans can vote. During next year's elections, there will be millions of Americans who will find that since 2008, there are now new barriers that could prevent them from voting. The number of states with laws requiring voters to show government-issued photo identification has quadrupled. Mr. Speaker, it has quadrupled since in the last 4 years. Actually, over the last year, it has quadrupled. In fact, at least 34 states have now introduced legislation that would require voters to show photo identification in order to vote, and 7 states, Alabama, Kansas, Rhode Island, South Carolina, Tennessee, Texas, and Wisconsin, have already signed photo identification bills into their law. Before this legislative session, only 2 states had ever imposed strict photo identification. Under the guise of eliminating voter fraud, 21 million American citizens, or 11% of Americans, could be prevented, Mr. Speaker, from voting, all because they do not possess a government-issued photo identification. Republicans are also seeking to put an end to early voting, a hugely popular voting method that is used by millions of Americans. At least 9 states have introduced bills to reduce their early voting periods. 4 states tried to reduce absentee voting opportunities. 2 states, Mr. Speaker, have reversed earlier reforms and once again disenfranchised thousands of tax-paying citizens who have past criminal convictions, while a number of other states have made it much more difficult for citizens to register to vote. These new restrictions will undoubtedly disenfranchise young voters, minority voters, low-income voters, and voters with disabilities, all of which, as we know, traditionally vote with the Democratic Party. In my home state of North Carolina, Republicans have mounted 2 strong efforts to suppress low-income and African-American voters. House Bill 351, for example, a voter ID bill, which passed our State House and Senate earlier this year. But it was vetoed by Governor Beverly Perdue, and we thank her for being strong in vetoing that legislation. Senate Bill 47, which would reduce the early voting period by 1 week, eliminate Sunday voting, and eliminate same-day voter registration. This bill is currently pending now in our legislature. The right to vote, Mr. Speaker, is protected. It is dearly protected by constitutional amendments, more constitutional amendments, the First Amendment and the 14th Amendment, 15th, 19th, 24th, and even the 26th Amendment. It is more constitutional amendments than any other right we enjoy as Americans. We must continue to inform our constituents that their fundamental right in this democracy is being infringed and fight back against voter suppression epidemic. It is obvious, in closing, Mr. Speaker, to me that any objective observer who is looking at this will know the real motive of this effort. It is specifically intended to diminish voter participation of some in our society who support progressive movements and who support the Democratic Party. I want to thank you for the time this morning, Mr. Speaker. I yield back the balance of any time that I might have. Thank you.
Chair recognizes the gentleman from California, Mr. Royce, for 5 minutes.
Mr. Speaker, I rise before you today to honor Dr. Milton A. Gordon for his distinguished career. Dr. Gordon has served for over 2 decades as president of California State University, Fullerton. I first met Milt Gordon more than 20 years ago when he was in his first year as president of my alma mater, Cal State Fullerton. As a state senator then and as a member of Congress now, I have met countless community leaders, including university presidents, and I've enjoyed a good working relationship with them. Very few, however, have I come to admire and respect more than Milt Gordon. Very few do I call my very good friend. Mr. Speaker, Dr. Gordon's impressive achievements and commitment to education were evident long before he became the president of Cal State Fullerton. As our country was undergoing the civil rights movement, Milt Gordon was breaking through long-standing racial barriers. He obtained a Bachelor of Science in Mathematics and Secondary Education at Xavier University, Louisiana in 1957, a Master's of Arts in Mathematics at the University of Detroit in 1960, and lastly a doctorate degree in mathematics at the Illinois Institute of Technology in 1968. These are significant achievements for anyone, but even more so for someone who had to overcome the discrimination of the time. It is this experience that has driven Milt Gordon's lifetime commitment to improving access to education for everyone. In his first convocation address at Cal State Fullerton in 1990, Dr. Gordon said, "By providing access to professional careers for the broadest cross-section of Americans, including women and members of minority and immigrant groups, our university represents a pathway into the American mainstream for individuals and families who otherwise would not have the opportunity to make this step, thus helping to ensure the stability of our free economy and of our democratic government." That was his first commencement address. Well, from that commencement address, I would say that the impressive enrollment and graduation statistics and the many awards and the accolades that Milt Gordon has received over the last 20-some years clearly demonstrate that he more than met the challenge of his work. Today, Cal State Fullerton is one of our nation's largest and most inclusive institutions of higher education. And I assure you, greater quality has been the hallmark of this growth. It is no exaggeration to say that Dr. Gordon has just transformed CSUF from being a regional school to being a global one. His vision has provided an enriching environment which allows students to develop intellectual and cultural and economic curiosities well beyond Orange County, California. The university in the Gordon years has been an unquestioned asset to the region, to the state, the country, and the world. In closing, as an alumnus and the congressman who represents this university, I have to say that I am sorry to see President Gordon retire. His accomplishments are many, and the university will continue to thrive because of them. But there is only one Milt Gordon. But speaking as a friend, I am pleased for Milt and for his wife Marge. They have dedicated their lives to education, to Cal State Fullerton, and to their community. To that end, they deserve our deepest gratitude and our most heartfelt wishes for a long and enjoyable retirement. After a job very well done. I yield back.
Chair recognizes the gentleman from New York, Mr. Rangel, for 5 minutes.
Mr. Speaker, I should add Mr. Consent to advise in my remarks.
Without objection.
Last Christmas, the gift that we gave to the unemployed was the shock of their lives as they thought that the Congress would not extend the unemployment compensation. And so this morning I've joined with Congressman Stark, Doggett, Levin, Crawley to make certain that we don't do that again this year. The opposition to the extension last year was due to a large number of Republicans truly believing and voting against the bill that these people really would rather receive unemployment checks than look for work. Of course, it's more than just the salary when you're working. It's the pride and dignity of knowing that you're taking care of your family, you're responsible for putting food on the table, clothing on your children's back, and all of those things that America has come to believe is just a normal way of life. But with the poverty numbers growing so fast and the unemployment going up so fast, we are losing a lot of people that lose hopes in terms of finding a job. As a matter of fact, it's oft-time forgotten, in order to qualify for extended unemployment comp, you have to be qualifying for a job. But because jobs are so scarce and people want to remain with a little bit of dignity and not just automatically increase the rolls of poverty, we ask that this body, in the name of humanity, think about these people as they would think about themselves if suddenly they found themselves without work and without their savings and without health care and without the resources to save their families from disasters. But in addition to that, when we go home next week, and again we will be home, talk to some of the local vendors. Since we all recognize that it's small businesses that's really the backbone of our economy, it's small businesses that produce the jobs. But one of the problems they're having is if consumers don't buy, they can't sell, and they cannot continue to hire people, which adds to the vicious cycle of unemployment. And so, if those people truly believe that they want to spur the economy, allow these people to be able to buy the goods and services that they would normally buy if they were employed. And for God's sakes, since yesterday or the day before yesterday, we made it abundantly clear that we trust in God. So, and for God's sakes, let's get a jobs bill on the floor. Let's put aside our party labels. Let's just put the election aside long enough to be able to get our country back to work. More and more people are not only losing their jobs, but the most important ingredient I think that America has is giving hope to people who don't have much. If we take that away from them by seeing the solid pillars of our society without work, without the ability to take care of their families, little hope that it gives for those people that have been consistently unemployed as the job market shrinks. And so I do hope that there'll come a time, and very, very soon, that there will be no need in this great country for unemployment compensation, because we would have been able to have a jobs bill that would include severe cuts in terms of the expenditures that we make, but also would include putting revenue on the table so that we just don't balance the budget at the expense of those people who have little or no resources. The United States of America, unfortunately, is becoming one of the countries that have the widest gap between the handful of 1% of the people that own almost half of the wealth of this great nation. That formula doesn't work economically, it doesn't work morally, and it doesn't work spiritually. And so we all have to come to the table to save this nation, whether we're wealthy or whether we hope one day to become middle class and wealthy, because without the country having hope for the future, there's absolutely no hope for the people that are looking for employment to raise their family and to forever protect this great nation. I yield back the balance of my time.
Chair recognizes the gentleman from Colorado, Mr. Kaufman, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. As we approach the 236th birthday of the United States Marine Corps, I would like to take the opportunity to honor a Marine who I served with during the first Gulf War. Chief Warrant Officer W-5 John Curry, the United States Marine Corps Reserve retired, served our nation with distinction from his first enlistment in 1966 to his retirement in 1999. I met Chief Warrant Officer Curry late in the fall of 1990 when I volunteered to serve with a light armored infantry company that was mobilized for the first Gulf War. From the start, I was deeply impressed by his leadership, the respect his subordinate Marines had for him, and by his tactical skill and the courage he demonstrated on the battlefield. His citation for the Navy Commendation Medal reads, quote, "Late in the afternoon of 21 February 1991, Chief Warrant Officer W-3 Curry decisively led his platoon through enemy indirect fires to occupy a key defensive position opposite significant portions of an Iraqi infantry brigade. Over the next 2 days and nights of combat, his clear reasoning, calm issuance of orders, and effective employment of supporting arms against enemy forces motivated his platoon and the entire company in their efforts to hold the center of the battalion's defenses. Early on the morning of 24 February 1991, he led his platoon to a new position on the division's extreme left flank and initiated a series of aggressive actions against enemy positions which inflicted numerous casualties. Chief Warrant Officer W-3 Curry's coolness, poise, and decisive actions inspired and steadied all who observed him as he successfully gained and maintained control over a very fluid and chaotic situation caused by the surrender of more than 800 Iraqi soldiers," unquote. I will never forget Chief Warrant Officer W-5 John Curry and all he did, not only to lead his men so effectively against the enemy, but in setting such a high standard for all of the officers in the command, to include myself. Chief Warrant Officer John Curry is a credit to the United States Marine Corps, and it's an honor to reflect on his service to our nation and to the Marine Corps as we approach the 236th birthday for the Corps. Mr. Speaker, I yield back the balance of my time.
Chair recognizes the gentlewoman from California, Ms. Spear, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise again today with a heavy heart to talk about sexual assault and rape in the military, an epidemic in this country that must be addressed. As I said before, the Department of Defense, by its own statistics, has stated that 19,000 service members, women and men, every year are raped by fellow soldiers. I will continue to share these stories until something changes. Survivors can email me at stopmilitaryrape@mail.house.gov if they want to speak out. Each of these soldiers was raped by another soldier, and each was subjected to a system of justice that protects the perpetrators and punishes the victims. The story I will tell today is the story of Corporal Sarah Albertson. This gets to the rot at the root of the justice system in the military, and that is a commander, one person, has complete and total discretion in deciding how and if sexual assault and rape are dealt with. Corporal Albertson served in the Marine Corps from 2003 to 2008. On August 27, 2006, Corporal Albertson was raped by a fellow Marine, a man who outranked her. That's right, he outranked her and raped her. Right after the rape, Corporal Albertson went to her commander to inform him of what had happened. Instead of detaining her alleged assailant, calling in criminal investigators, or sending Corporal Albertson to the hospital to preserve the evidence that would corroborate her story, he told Corporal Albertson that because she had consumed some alcohol, if she reported the rape, she would be charged with inappropriate barrack conduct. She was then told not to discuss her rape with anyone and was also ordered to respect her rapist and follow his orders because he outranked her. It soon became clear to Corporal Albertson that others knew about what had happened, and her other superiors, acting with the open support of her commander, ostracized and harassed her. Corporal Albertson sought counseling. The military counselor that Corporal Albertson went to, in no uncertain terms, advised her commander that she should not be forced to interact with her rapist, and that Corporal Albertson was suffering from panic attacks due to these interactions. Her commander ignored the professional advice and forced her to interact with her rapist for another 2 years. And when she had panic attacks, she was punished. This same commander also refused Corporal Albertson's request to change housing. Instead, he forced her to live 1 floor below her rapist for 2 years. The commander also required her to disclose medications she had been prescribed to counter the trauma. Now, Corporal Albertson never filled those prescriptions, but nonetheless, by having to disclose those prescriptions, she lost her security clearance. But what happened to her rapist? Not a thing. In fact, I'd venture to say he has been promoted, not just once, probably twice, probably 3 times. I have become painfully aware that at the rate DOD is working to address this issue, the epidemic of military sexual assault will never end. Mr. Speaker, this is a national travesty. Congress, the administration, the Department of Defense, all of us should be ashamed of what is going on in the military. I yield back.
Chair recognizes the gentleman from Mississippi, Mr. Nunnally, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Today I rise in support of the Keystone XL pipeline. Opponents of this pipeline claim that it'll damage the environment, that it'll ship oil from Canada to China, and that increasing the supply of oil will somehow raise gas prices. The truth, this pipeline has been through the most thorough environmental review of any pipeline in history. The oil carried by it will go to American markets and will help lower energy prices by moving capacity from growing basins in Canada, Montana, North Dakota, Oklahoma, and West Texas. That is comparable in volume to nearly half of the U.S. Persian Gulf imports. The Keystone XL pipeline will also benefit America by increasing the percentage of our energy supply provided by a stable neighbor an ally. More North American oil means less oil from Venezuela and Iran. This pipeline will create 20,000 high-wage construction jobs and 100,000 indirect jobs. Keystone XL will also provide a new and stable supply access to Gulf Coast refiners like the one in Pascagoula, Mississippi, who set the price of gasoline and are vulnerable to OPEC and supply distributions. We in the House are focused on jobs and the economy, and this pipeline is an obvious direct example of what real stimulus looks like. Stimulus that comes from the private economy and produces real value. The fact of the matter is that Canada is going to develop their resources, and if we do not want their oil, that supply will go elsewhere to our competitors such as China. The Canadians have the supply, and we have the demand. And the Keystone XL pipeline has gone through a rigorous environmental review. There's no reason not to move forward with this vital project. The President needs to get off the campaign trail long enough to get his administration out of the way so that the Keystone XL pipeline can be developed. Mr. Speaker, I yield back.